At some point, you probably sat across from someone, a friend, a therapist, maybe just yourself in a quiet moment, and admitted it. I keep ending up in the same situation. Different person, but the same story. Same hot and cold, same waiting by the phone, same version of you, smaller than you meant to be, trying harder than you should have to. And the thing that haunts you isn't even the heartbreak anymore. It's the pattern. Because you're not careless, you're not naive. You've done the journaling, maybe the therapy. You made a list of green flags. You told yourself, next time will be different. And then you felt that pull towards someone, that specific electricity. And somewhere deep down, some part of you already knew, already recognized it, already knew exactly how this particular story goes. And you went anyway. So what is that? What is that pull toward the familiar, even when the familiar hurts? Why does the healthy option feel flat, while the complicated one feels like coming home? That is exactly what this video is about. Not to make you feel hopeless, not to tell you that you're doomed to repeat yourself forever, but to show you, with the actual science and psychology behind it, why this happens, where it lives, and what it actually takes to change it. Because the answer isn't trying harder, the answer is going deeper. And that starts right now. Let's start with something most people find deeply uncomfortable. The pattern is not random, and it is not bad luck. The people you attract, or more precisely, the people you allow in, the people you stay for, the people whose particular flavor of unavailability or chaos or intensity feels magnetic, they are not accidents. They are selected. Below conscious awareness, but selected nonetheless. Psychologist Dr. John Gottman, who has spent over 40 years at the Gottman Institute studying relationship dynamics, makes this point plainly. We are far less in control of our attraction than we believe. What we experience as chemistry, as that undeniable electric pull towards someone, is often the nervous system's recognition of something familiar. Not familiar as in safe, familiar as in known. And known to the parts of your brain that formed their expectations long before you had language feels like home, even if home was a difficult place. This is the foundation of the pattern, and to understand it fully, we need to go back, further than your last relationship, further than your first relationship, to the place where your entire relational blueprint was first drawn, your earliest experiences of love. In 1920, Sigmund Freud observed something in his patients that he found deeply puzzling. People didn't just remember painful experiences, they recreated them. Patients who had been humiliated as children seemed to find themselves in adult situations that replicated that humiliation. Those who had been abandoned entered relationships that ended in abandonment. Those who had loved someone emotionally unavailable were drawn again and again to emotional unavailability. Freud gave us the map, Jung gave us the deeper territory beneath it. Carl Jung built on Freud's insight and took it somewhere Freud hadn't fully followed. He argued that our attraction to certain people is not just about recreating old wounds, it is about projection. Projection, in the Jungian sense, is the unconscious process of seeing qualities in another person, qualities that actually belong to us or to our unresolved internal world, and responding to them as though they exist entirely in the other. We project what Jung called the anima or animus, the unconscious inner image of the opposite, onto actual people. We project the shadow, the qualities we've disowned in ourselves, onto people who seem to carry them. We project our unmet needs, our unexpressed desires, our deepest fears, and then we fall in love with the projection, not the person. The person is almost incidental in those early stages. What we've fallen for is the screen onto which we've projected our own unconscious material. This is why intense, immediate attraction, the kind that feels fated, electric, overwhelming, so often leads to the most painful dynamics. Because what feels fated is the recognition of the projection. The moment the projection begins to dissolve, when the real person emerges, complex and imperfect, and nothing like the inner image we'd cast them in, the intensity often turns. The enchantment becomes disillusionment. The magnetic pull becomes confusion or resentment. Jung wrote that until we make the unconscious conscious, it directs our lives, and we call it fate. What we call chemistry, what we call fate, what we call I just knew, is often the unconscious wearing the face of destiny. In 1988, psychologist Dr. Harville Hendrix published a book that would reshape relationship therapy, Getting the Love You Want. In it, he introduced the concept of the Imago, from the Latin word for image. The Imago, Hendrix argued, is an unconscious composite image built from the sum of your earliest caregiver's traits, both their gifts and their wounds. The warmth of one parent, the distance of another, the unpredictability, the high expectations, the tenderness, the critical voice, the absence. All of this is encoded below conscious awareness into a kind of internal template, a blueprint of what love looks, feels, and sounds like. And this blueprint then functions like a radar, quietly, constantly scanning the people you encounter, looking for the one whose particular combination of traits most closely matches the template. Not the healthiest person in the room, not necessarily the kindest, the most familiar, the one whose emotional signature most closely resembles the emotional signature of your earliest formative relationships. Hendrix said it plainly, we are unconsciously drawn to people who have both the positive and the negative qualities of our primary caregivers. Which means, if you grew up with a parent who was loving but critical, you may be unconsciously drawn to partners who are warm but withholding. Not because you enjoy the pain of criticism, but because the combination, warmth plus withdrawal, is the emotional signature your nervous system learned to call love. The imago is not a flaw, it is a blueprint, and blueprints can be redrawn, but only once you can see them. Now, let's go beneath the psychology into the actual neuroscience, because this is where the pattern gets its real grip. Neuroscientist Dr. Antonio Damasio, in his landmark work on emotion and decision-making, demonstrated that the human brain does not separate feeling from thinking in the way we once believed. Emotional memory is deeply woven into cognitive function. What this means, practically, is that the people we are drawn to are not just cognitively evaluated, they are emotionally recognized. The brain is pattern matching against a vast library of emotional experiences, and when it finds a match, it produces a feeling of recognition, familiarity, and rightness, even when the pattern it's matching is one of pain. Researcher Dr. Lucy Brown at Albert Einstein College of Medicine studied the brain activity of people in love using fMRI scanning. What she found was striking. Romantic attraction activates the brain's dopaminergic reward system, the same system involved in addiction, goal-seeking, and motivation. And here is the critical detail. This system is most powerfully activated not by consistent reward, but by intermittent reward, by unpredictability, by the pattern of sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't, which is exactly the emotional pattern of anxious attachment, of enmeshed family systems, of early environments where love was present but unreliable. Your brain was trained in your earliest years to find the intermittent reward cycle maximally activating. And so the partner who is consistent, warm, reliable, the one who on paper is clearly better for you, does not produce the same neurological hit. They feel calm, safe, nice, but not electric. While the partner who is unpredictable, withholding, occasionally brilliant, and occasionally devastating, they feel like home. Not because they are better, because your nervous system is optimized for exactly this frequency. Here is where most psychology videos stop, and here is exactly where they should keep going. Because many people, perhaps you, already have the awareness. You know you have a type. You've read the books, you've had the therapy, you've identified the pattern, and then you met someone and felt that pull and went anyway. And afterward you thought, I knew better. Why didn't knowing change anything? This is one of the most important questions in all of psychology, and the answer is humbling. Awareness is necessary, but awareness operates at the level of the cortex, the thinking brain. The pattern, however, lives much deeper, in the limbic system, in the brainstem, in the nervous system's encoded expectations about how love behaves. Dr. Daniel Siegel, clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA and founder of interpersonal neurobiology, describes this as the difference between explicit memory, what we know, and implicit memory, what we feel and enact below the level of conscious knowledge. The pattern lives in implicit memory, and implicit memory is not changed by knowing. It is changed by experiencing. Specifically, by what Siegel calls a corrective emotional experience, a sustained encounter with a relational reality that is genuinely different from the encoded template. This is why simply knowing your pattern is not enough. You have to feel something different, repeatedly, over time, in your body, not just in your mind. And that is where the real work lives. So what does it actually take? First, and this is the step that costs the most, you have to grieve. Not just the relationship, the hope inside the pattern. The hope that this time the unavailable person would stay, that this time the critical voice would say you're enough, that this time the story would end differently. That hope is not pathetic. It is one of the most fundamentally human things about you. But as long as it lives unexamined, it will keep casting people in roles they cannot fill. Grieving it means acknowledging it, sitting with the loss of a possibility that was never actually real, and allowing that loss to be felt completely, rather than immediately replaced by the next attempt at resolution. Second, the relationship with yourself has to become the primary relationship, not as a consolation prize, not as a placeholder while you wait for something better, as the actual foundation. Psychologist and author Dr. Nicole LePera, whose work on what she calls the holistic self has reached millions, argues this clearly. Until you develop the capacity to provide for yourself the consistency, validation, and presence you've been seeking from partners, you will continue to seek it in people whose unavailability activates the familiar pattern. The internal shift from, I need someone to finally give me this, to, I can build this in myself, that is the shift that changes what you attract. Not because you've closed yourself off, but because you've stopped walking into rooms starving. Third, and perhaps most practically, you have to practice tolerating what doesn't feel electric. Because initially, the person who is consistent and kind and genuinely available will feel wrong, not because they are wrong, because they are unfamiliar. And your nervous system, trained to read familiar as safe and unfamiliar as suspicious, will generate unease. Dr. Harville Hendrix called this the challenge of conscious relationship, the deliberate, often uncomfortable work of choosing someone who is good for you and sitting with the dissonance until it settles into something real. The electricity over time becomes warmth. The unfamiliar becomes home. But it requires patience with the discomfort of growth, and that patience, for most people, is the hardest part of all. You are not doomed to repeat this. You are not destined to keep falling for the same person in a different body, but the pattern will not break through willpower alone. It will not break through awareness alone. It will not break through the decision to simply try harder next time. It will break when you go where the pattern actually lives, in the implicit memories, the encoded expectations, the unconscious blueprint drawn long before you were old enough to question it. It will break when you stop trying to get the wound resolved through another person and start attending to it directly. It will break when you become for yourself what you've been spending your life searching for in others. That is not a small task, but it is the only one that works. Leave a comment below. Tell me about the pattern you recognized in yourself today. I read every one. And take the next step, not away from love, toward a version of it that actually lasts.